Okay, Timothy, so is more regulation A coming and B going to be good?
Well, I hope it's coming and it will certainly be good. This is still largely an unregulated sector, and that's something people need to keep in mind. I think people see that there's been a public offering and they think, oh, it must be a regulated industry. The fact is, even though that Coinbase has a market capitalization now that will exceed that of the stock exchanges it will trade on, it's not regulated like those exchanges. There's essentially no federal regulator, and that means less investor protection against manipulation and fraud, or even conflicts of interest by Coinbase itself. So, I hope we see it. What we've seen so far is really a focus on illicit use of crypto. The Treasury Department has been very good in that area. But the fact is, we have a gap in our laws. Neither the Securities and Exchange Commission nor the Commodity Futures Trading Commission has the authority to regulate Coinbase.
That's a good point, Timothy. So who's supposed to regulate it, and why is no one yet in charge of it?
Because we haven't fixed our laws. Our laws have not been updated to address this. Europe is fixing its laws. The UK is working on fixing its laws. We have not done so. There are huge gaps in the regulatory framework, and that means there is no cop looking over.
So the bulls wind up saying stuff like, yeah, but Coinbase, for example, wound up paying a $6 million fine. They're working with regulators. They're going to help craft the regulation for et cetera. What's your pushback to that?
Well, that fine was interesting. That was a case brought by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, which has very, very limited jurisdiction over Coinbase. It can only bring an enforcement action where it sees true manipulation or fraud. It doesn't have the power to set standards. So in fact, one of the CFTC commissioners said, basically, we shouldn't have brought this case because it's going to give people the wrong impression that we do regulate Coinbase, and we don't.
That's really interesting. Do you feel like that's the case? Like, do you think that people do?
Yes, it's absolutely the case. There is no federal regulator for these entities. And, the irony here, what's really kind of ironic about this whole industry is when Bitcoin was launched over a decade ago, it was meant to transform the financial system by creating peer-to-peer transactions so we wouldn't have to rely on large, trusted financial intermediaries that, had like the big banks that brought us the global financial crisis. But the fact is, Coinbase is a large financial intermediary, and it's less accountable than those big banks. So, we need to update our laws. Whether Congress will get around to doing that, it's not clear. Whether the regulators, like, Gary Gensler, certainly understands crypto, but he's limited in what he can do at the SEC.
Well, I was going to say, sort of, with the nomination approved yesterday, it was ironic that it happened on the same day that Coinbase went public. But what's some low-hanging fruit that he can kind of do quickly?
Well, see, the difference is the SEC has authority over securities. And some crypto assets have been deemed to be securities. But the big ones aren't securities, like Bitcoin, like Ether. And those are the main things Coinbase trades. So Coinbase is not a securities exchange. Now, Mr. Gensler, could look at things like ETFs and decide whether he wants to allow those, but he doesn't have the power to set standards for Coinbase.
Which means you're talking that they're basically then commodities. So it should be regulated as a commodity index or commodity exchange?
Well, when I was chair of the CFTC, we did declare them to be commodities because they were being used in derivative contracts. And when something is used in a derivative contract, that automatically makes it a commodity. But that didn't give the CFTC the power over the cash market. It gave the CFTC the power over derivatives using Bitcoin, but not the cash trading of Bitcoin, Ether, and so forth, which is where most of the trading lies. And again, that's the gap.
It's making my head hurt, Timothy. There's just like, I can imagine what your job was like.
But we basically have this big gap where there isn't a federal regulator for the cash market of cryptocurrencies.
You mentioned sort of decentralized finance, and that's what this should have been. Is, though, this exchange really decentralized finance? I would think that it's more on the centralized finance.
No, it's not. That's again, the irony of it. Coinbase is not decentralized. And, it's a large financial intermediary now that people have to trust. You have to trust that it's going to keep good custody of your assets. You have to trust that it's going to execute your order promptly and properly. There's no best execution rule in crypto. You have to trust that it's not going to front run your order, but there's not even a prohibition against that. So, that's the problem.